Japan by River Cruise is made possible thanks to those who donate to the show at japanbyrivercruise.com and due to the generosity of our corporate sponsors. This week's show is brought to you by the Study Abroad Experience.
One of the many casualties of the coronavirus pandemic has been the hopes and dreams of thousands of young Japanese people who plan to use their school study abroad programs to spend a term or even a year or two abroad in the United States of America. That's why it's our sincere hope that until you can actually travel abroad once again, we can help provide you with the next best thing. A fully immersive study abroad experience right here within the borders of Japan. Not only do we provide an apathetically taught, terrible ESOL curriculum, as per American standards, but we've captured the most important extracurricular aspects of the study abroad experience. So if you can't leave the country but you still want to enjoy spending thousands of dollars to stay in an uninspiring family's spare room that even Harry Potter would think is too small, a 4 times a day 5,600 calorie meal plan, an inept, selfish sexual partner with a very problematic attraction to you, and a white family who will take you to Benihana once a month, let us be there for you. Plus, just as with traditional study abroad programs in America, you'll make lots of Japanese friends. Our guarantee: even though you'll never actually go to another country to study, you'll gain so much weight that Japanese people will still say, "Aitsu wa ryugaku shite hitamawari ookiku natta ne."
Hello, Brian, and welcome back to Japan by River Cruise. I'm Bobby Judo.
And I'm Ollie Horn.
And joining us this week is Noah Oskow, translator, writer, and manager of Unseen Japan, a site that aims to showcase real everyday Japan while also shining a light on Japanese social issues that are often overlooked abroad. For example, UJ broke the story that the Kobe beef served on Abekuma River's famous kosher river cruises was not actually kosher. Apparently, they'd gotten away with it for so long because everyone was more focused on confirming that it was actually from Kobe. Noah, props on that story, and thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here, and shouldn't the 2,000 Jews of Japan be able to eat some kosher brisket when you're on a river in northern Japan? I think this is a very important issue.
As one of them, I totally agree. On this week's show, the announcement of a planned international music festival and the arrival of Olympic athletes once again highlights the unjust nature of Japan's selective border control, reminding us all that while regular people like us suffer under strict regulations, the rules just don't apply to rock stars and water polo players. Plus, Ollie's got your weekly River Cruise recommendation. Ollie?
Yes, Bobby, this week's recommendation is a special river cruise that's been put on for international Olympic athletes that are arriving to Japan. This river cruise is going to serve things that are hard to get in Tokyo so the athletes aren't tempted to leave the Olympic Village. The rumoured menu includes Kumamoto Basashi, Hokkaido Snow Crab, and the Oxford AstraZeneca.
Also, with summer fast approaching, famous Japanese popsicle maker Gari Gari-kun has announced that this year's seasonal flavors will consist of ice pops that taste like some of Japan's most famous rivers. Detractors have pointed out that this will likely mean producing flavors that taste awful, but company representatives have countered by pointing out that that's never stopped them before. More on that later, but first, Soap Talk. Brian, we need to clear something up real quick.
What's going on?
We often refer to Brian in our joke tweets. Like the other day, I tweeted something about how in a certain headline, the word massaging was being stretched further than that time that Brian had to explain the Gotanda credit card charge to his wife. And in that specific case, Brian acts as a kind of conceptual representation of our listenership. And when we do that, we are not talking about you, Brian, but since you're always here on the show as a personified stand-in for the conceptual Brian that is all of our listeners, I think it gets a little confusing. So I just wanted to make sure that we established that unless we specifically tag you, Brian, in the tweet, we're not talking about you, Brian, but rather all of you, Brians.
Cutting edge stuff, guys.
Right, anyway. Really glad that's been cleared up. Noah, a lot of our listeners will know about Unseen Japan. It seems the growth seems to have been exponential over the last couple of years, and it seems partly because you produce great content on your blog, but it also seems that some of the kind of social issues of the day, you're just the first to translate it into English. You're often the first point of contact for the English-speaking Twitter to find out about. and you're seen as a bit of an authority for social issues, not only finding out about them, but also what we're supposed to think about them too.
I'm gonna take that as high praise. That's to a certain extent that's kind of news to me actually, because I mean I hadn't really conceived of the website as having such an impact. Now, of course, I've only very recently taken the reins, so I really can't take credit for basically any of that. That's really all our founder, who's kind of managed to take his idea for Unseen Japan and to make it as kind of well known within a certain kind of an environment as it is now. But if that's the case, I mean, that's wonderful.
Well,
I think we're just trying to translate things as they come out, in a meaningful way. Find opinions and discussions and topics that are meaningful and make sure they're presented in English. And I'm glad that we can have any impact at all in that way.
a lot of it is very, very funny. Like some of the just random viral funny tweets that a Japanese person posts that go viral in the Japanese Twitter sphere. When you get to see them translated into English, often they're just as funny or funnier. And I really appreciate seeing that. I noticed there's a big difference when you translate something that's just kind of a funny throwaway viral tweet and everybody loves it, as opposed to when you translate a social justice voice out of Japan. Once you do that, it's all of a sudden it's the Westerners are forcing their liberal perspective onto, like, look at these white people in Japan, trying to raise all these political issues, and you kind of have to reiterate over and over again, we are just translating Japanese voices. That's got to be so frustrating.
I mean, historically speaking, and when I'm talking about history, it's the deep, deep history of like the 2.5 years that this website has existed. But yeah, that has been a source of frustration. I'm sure that's a source of frustration for anybody at the moment who's involved in any sort of translation. I mean, I know you guys have talked about this on the show before, but the kind of assumptions that are made about your intentions by even taking a voice and translating it into English can be a little bit difficult to deal with sometimes. But when it comes to this, there's this sort of dichotomy with the way that our Twitter is currently presented, which is, like you're saying, we do some of these just translations of viral tweets, kind of stuff that's just for fun, and then we do a lot of stuff that is much more serious. But even in the case, in both cases, when it comes to kind of quote tweeting, translating something that's being said in Japan, whether or not it's something about an important issue or if it's just a joke. I mean, we have received criticism even just for the idea that we are translating things beyond just the idea that. I don't know if you guys have maybe noticed this argument that happened on Twitter, but it was said at one point, and this is fairly recent, and this unfortunately is during an episode that had some impact on the site itself. This idea that by quote tweeting and translating that we were speaking over Japanese voices. Was something that was specifically brought up.
I do think that is unanswerable, and for what it's worth, I think the quality of your translations have always been really, really excellent, and I don't think that you're guilty of injecting an agenda. However, I do believe that the argument that simply by virtue of selecting what to translate and what to amplify, that definitely does create an agenda and an editorial voice, because necessarily there'll be tweets which you're not going to bother translating and tweets which you do want to amplify.
Well, is it a different experience to tweet something that is controversial in like right-wing circles than to tweet something that you think will play to your core audience and find out that it kind of creates factions within your general audience?
I haven't personally really experienced that happening myself at the point in which something like that really happened with the Unseen Japan Twitter. I was not in control of the Twitter at all, or really involved with it beyond just being a spectator. But of course, I think that you're onto something, which is when you do something which upsets the people who are going to kind of hate you anyway, or who had major issues with your mission statement to begin with, you're expecting to have to deal with that. You're expecting to take on a certain level of umbrage and a certain level of attack from that, and you kind of steel yourself against that because you can say to yourself, well, of course this is going to upset those people, and to a certain extent, maybe it should, and I'm ready for that. But when it does kind of, you end up accidentally, in one way or another, really upsetting people who you did not already consider to be your ideological opposites.
Right.
I think that can have a much greater emotional toll, especially because it's quite possible that the same exact sort of language that, for example, like a far right troll might use against you, or the exact same talking points are then kind of repurposed by people who you would imagine are ideologically closer to you. And then the same attacks are made, but from a point that you're not expecting. I mean, your shield isn't raised to that sector, and all of a sudden the attack is coming from somewhere else. It's a very similar attack, but it's not where you're expecting to get hit from. And I think that definitely happened in our case, and I don't think it was very fun for the people involved, unfortunately. I mean, like I'm saying, that wasn't me at the time.
Yeah.
But even watching from afar, it was a bit difficult to see.
Well, I think there are patterns that I think I recognize in a lot of accounts that I follow, and I recognize these patterns because I see myself doing the same things in terms of the way tweeting and getting attention for your tweets can be very, very addictive. Social media attention can be super addictive. And so in my case, I'll look for a joke to make, and I'll see somebody tweet something and I go, I can make a joke out of this because there's a mistake here, or because, they didn't understand something, and I can point that out. And when I get attention for that, when I receive this positive reinforcement for that, then I go, okay, let me find another tweet. And what happens is the bar gets lower and lower, where you go, well, this person, I see what they're saying, but I can pick at this. Or this person, they didn't get this just right. And I get into that cycle. And I've seen a lot of these social justice accounts, which Ali and I consider ourselves kind of a social justice oriented show, I think. But I've seen a lot of these accounts that at first I start following them because they're retweeting or they're quote tweeting things that I absolutely agree with. And I go, yeah, they're really doing, the good work. And then I'll see them retweeting things that kind of get into these like attacks, like not friendly fire, but I think I've seen like people go after somebody for saying something anti-feminist, and I see the person they're going after, and I go, they're going after a feminist. Like I've seen like a feminist comedian that I know is a really, really genuinely progressive, genuinely helpful, well-meaning feminist comedian, but a Twitter account took issue with it and went after it. And I think it's not so much always that you see something that needs to be called out. I think you kind of get addicted to this cycle of getting positive reinforcement for doing social justice online. And like Ali said, when that becomes your focus and your audience consists of people who are just there for that, it's really easy for that mob to turn.
Yeah, what you're kind of talking about here, I mean, it's completely and absolutely true. I mean, Twitter famously, I mean, this is a place where people really eat their own. That's absolutely a phenomenon that we see happening. And I mean, I don't know if this maybe you guys have noticed this or not with Unseen Japan, but a big thing that we have tried to do is that previously, I think the account was really firmly associated with one person, with a single voice. Our Twitter account really was a kind of, it was personified. There was a personalized aspect to it, with this discussion of personal feelings, with these back and forth conversations, and like this kind of more direct, more there are call outs. There's like discussions of that really are obviously coming from one person, and what we have done since the Great Conflagration has been to depersonify our Twitter account. Like our website is like the main mission for us. It's the website, and as much as getting these big popular angry tweets out does increase your popularity on Twitter, it doesn't do that much for really getting out this in-depth sort of research and reportage that we're really trying to do.
Right.
So I think the switch has been a good thing.
Well, we look forward to seeing the direction that you guys go in.
We already say that because we're scared that you might weaponize your audience against us.
No, we like river cruises at Unseen Japan. We're firmly for them.
So with that then, shall we take a look at the news? Bobby, do you know what's in the news this week?
The very famous music festival, Summer Sonic, here in Japan, has announced via Twitter press release that they aim to be 2021's first music festival with a lineup that will include artists from overseas. And Twitter is very upset about this. Let's pretend that we don't know any of the background at all. And I just want to ask Noah, if the state of emergency is ostensibly over in Japan and the vaccination process is ostensibly underway in Japan, then what's the problem with letting artists in for a music festival?
So the problem is that right now there are a lot of people around the world who have good reasons to come to the country, for whom doing so is not only impossible, but for the time schedule of being able to is not in any way being communicated by the Japanese government. And when it comes to, specifically right now, when it comes to the idea of Summer Sonic bringing in these foreign talents, their ability to do so hasn't even really been established at all. If you look at the press release, it's essentially saying, "Dude, trust me. Like, we're gonna make this happen." But there's absolutely no explanation as to how that is going to work out. They're saying September, that this is going to happen in September. I guess that maybe they have some insider knowledge. Maybe they know somebody in the government who says this is gonna work, and that these sorts of visas are really gonna be able to be issued on time for this. But I mean, they have not announced what artists they're talking about. There is no list for these artists, and there's no specifics on how they're going to do it. Because I think imagining that in a few months things are going to open up, and imagining in a few months that they're going to start letting in more, they're going to start issuing more visas to foreigners in general. I think this is something that we've been saying for 6 or 7 months now, that, it's only a few months away. So we'll see what happens with this.
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's obviously not happening. So whatever reason they had for putting this tweet out, and it might have just been for PR, that's worked. Right, so tickets are available for Summer Sonic. We're talking about it.
To be fair, Ali has been saying it's not happening about the Olympics for the last year.
Yeah, and it's not happening. It's not happening in any meaningful way, is it? So maybe this is just PR, and maybe we've fallen into their trap. But it obviously isn't happening. Just like Noah said, from a practical point of view, it's really hard to get foreign entertainer visas. And there are, for Japan at least, and there are loads of rules about how many months it takes before their trip. And I'm sure that the lead time of like July to September is just about enough if they start work now. And you've got to go through like these special offices where it's not the immigration that does it, it's like a local production company. And I have friends that work in this area, and I know that for many of these international production companies, they've just closed those offices.
But
so like, there's no one.
Yeah, but Ali, I hate to make this joke again, but it's only hard if you're the person who has to do it. For like a major artist, or for the people who are running this corporation that puts on Summer Sonic, they're just going to go, it's going to get done, and then somebody way far down the ladder is going to have to do it. People will take care of that.
Yeah, I'm obviously not imagining like Ariana Grande standing in a 6-hour queue in Shinagawa, having to then go back to the convenience store to get some stamps or something. Yeah, obviously I'm aware that it's not going to inconvenience the artists. But what I'm saying is just I don't actually think practically there's a way of expediting this process, and the process would have to start in the next few weeks. So obviously it's not happening for like those practical reasons. Obviously it's also not happening because anyone that does take this job will not be able to open their Twitter for 3 weeks, as loads of people angrily tweet, "What the hell do you think you're doing coming to this country?" When I'm not allowed to. So for another reason, it's bad PR. By the way, did you see that? Talking about Ariana Grande, that's why she's on my mind. Did you see that she did a musical with James Corden, which was a parody of Good Morning Baltimore, and they changed the lyrics to "No lockdowns anymore," and they released that like 2 weeks ago, while we're still in the middle of a pandemic where less than 5% of the entire population has been vaccinated. I mean, people, James Corden can be criticized for lots of different reasons, not necessarily his singing, but that certainly doing it is tone deaf. Anyway, we are in the middle of a pandemic. James Corden's forgotten this. Ariana Grande's forgotten this. These guys have forgotten this. But the story, which I am going to come back to now, is I have not. I actually have not. The story is... I'll tell you why I haven't forgotten it, because this was a story that we first brought up on this show months ago. I dare say over a year ago with Magdalena Osumi, where basically the Japanese government have basically ignored the category of people who do have very, very good reason to be in the country. And we've gone over the debate of like, oh, no one has a right to live in Japan. No one has a right to study abroad, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we get it. But there is a certain category of people who have built lives in Japan. And due to the peculiarity of their personal circumstances and just the way in which the roulette wheel of life landed, they've stopped having their life. Or they've put their plans on hold to move to Japan, or they temporarily left Japan, or whatever their circumstances were. And the issue is it's tone deaf that the Japanese government is saying, yeah, come on, if you can throw a javelin, in you come. If you're good at guitar, in you come. But there are people who do, for want of a better word, deserve to be in Japan who can't.
Yeah, it's a crime that the Japanese government is ignoring those people, so let's not make the same mistake and let's let one of them talk. Noah.
Noah, do you remember what
What's,
we're talking about?
Ollie. Noah, tell us what your situation is.
I'm proud to be one of the sort of underhood voices that Unseen Japan likes to lift up in this case. Yeah, I happen to be one of these people. This came about, I'm currently in a long distance relationship with my fiance. And the only reason that it's a long distance relationship right now is because of the pandemic, and specifically because of the regulations currently in place, essentially banning all entry by foreigners into Japan, and really putting a very hard moratorium on the issuing of new visas. Now, my partner, she's Japanese. We've been together for many years now. In fact, we were supposed to be married over a year ago now. And what happened to that is basically the pandemic made that completely impossible. Now, we were living actually in Europe when the pandemic hit. I was doing my master's in Germany and then in Austria, and I was in my second year. We were both living in Europe, and the pandemic really started a few months into my second year of my master's. And so we spent the first 6+ months of the pandemic in Austria, getting through lockdowns and the situation there, which thankfully was never even close to as bad as it was in the United States, at least at the time. Despite the fact that in Italy, so close, it was so terrible, even just across the border in Italy. Anyway, the main point, however, is that because I was doing my master's and my master's ended and I completed my master's, that meant that the period of us being able to live in Europe was coming to an end, because we no longer had a reason to be there. And she was also doing a working holiday, in Austria, and both of our visas were coming to an end. And this limbo was fast approaching. And what we wanted to do was to return to Japan, and to start working there, start making our life there. And I'm also hoping to do a PhD in Japan. And what occurred is that we were starting to plan this. I was reaching out and hoping to get a job. I had a good contact. We were starting to move forward with it. But then the reality that the new work visas weren't being issued set in, and the reality that it wasn't going to be possible for me to get to Japan set in, and the reality that it was going to be difficult for her to come to America, especially for anything more than just the 3 months on a tourist visa, that also set in.
And unlike other countries such as Australia, where if you're in a long-term relationship with someone, that can be the basis on which you could get a visa that isn't just a tourist or a temporary visitor visa. Japan has no such exceptions. And I've heard even reports of people who are married, but married abroad, couldn't come in together. So you are in a bit of a pickle, aren't you? And there doesn't seem to be any timeline in place.
Sadly, there is absolutely no timeline. As I was saying earlier, we kept on feeling like okay, in the 3 months this is going to change. In 3 months this is going to change. And honestly, I have been in the United States for over half a year now, and it's been entirely on this basis of thinking things are going to change, and then they don't. And Ollie, as you just mentioned, there are many countries where even if you are not actually married, in Europe, for example, they were starting to change the regulations to let in couples. But of course, saying, oh, we're a couple, that isn't really something that you can have in writing and stamped by some agency. And in Japan, I mean, the idea that even the idea that you're living with somebody that you're not married to is scandalous and very, very difficult for bureaucrats in Japan to imagine in the first place. It's going to be even worse to try to convince Japan that, there's so many international couples who are separated by these regulations right now, and the likelihood that Japan is going to take that into account is a big issue. And as I said, we were going to be married actually. The idea originally was to get married in Japan, which is probably the easiest place for us to get married, and yet that was impossible. So we aren't even spouses because of the pandemic, and they aren't even issuing spousal visas anyway. Right. So it's just as you're saying. Unfortunately, it's just a catch-22.
It's not just spousal visas, it's new student visas, it's new employee visas, and it's affecting so many people. And you mentioned this idea that I think a lot of these people have, that it's going to be better in 3 months, things will get better down the line. I saw a tweet today from somebody who was talking about how they were forced to defer admission to a Japanese study abroad program for their summer program last year, and then they put it off to spring of this year, and then they put it off again to summer of this year, and now they're being asked to put it off again. And what are they supposed to do with their school career in the meantime? And so I'm kind of wondering, at what point does your desire to be in Japan end up derailing your life? I mean, as most people who live here, who've had experience here know, usually you have to live here for 2 or 3 years before it derails your life. These people are having the same thing happen, and they don't even get to come over. So, but it's a serious question. Like, at what point do you reprioritize? What point do you go, this isn't worth it? Not about your wife, about
I mean,
about coming over.
Yeah. Thankfully, I have not gotten to that point at all where I'm thinking about, is this worth it or not? But I mean, that's very true. And I mean, that's also true, for example, for JET. There are all sorts of people who are supposed to be on their departures for JET to be ALTs to teach in Japan. And of course, that's a thing that the Japanese government is hiring people for JET. And yet they also had these deferments. And that's also this huge issue where, because in order to get into JET, it's over a year-long process, just, applying and interviewing and all this stuff. And then that was deferred and then deferred again. Meanwhile, within Japan, schools, there all sorts of ALTs are going back to their home countries. The ALT positions are completely unfilled. And despite what many Japanese teachers believe, and probably many ALTs believe, it turns out that ALTs actually do have a purpose, and that this is actually kind of an issue for a lot of school systems right now. And this, as I'm saying, JET is a governmental thing, and yet they were until very recently were not able to get in the new departure jets at all. And people are just stuck waiting for a job that they put so much time into. This is a big issue. I mean, I think that a lot of people, a lot of foreigners or people who come from foreign countries, and maybe, I mean, at some point even intended to take on Japanese citizenship. Who knows? I think for a lot of people who call Japan home or had thought they were going to call Japan home, this is a bit of a red flag in terms of how much the Japanese government cares about anyone who does not already have a Japanese passport.
That's a really good point. I think you do see a lot of people kind of falling out of love with the idea of life in Japan, or kind of going, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, in terms of acknowledging how I'm going to be seen or treated or not prioritized if I make my life here long term.
Absolutely.
There's a quote from Prime Minister Suga earlier today that somebody was taking issue with, this idea that he's talking about the Olympic athletes coming in and people asking about concerns around that. And his response was, we're getting proof of vaccination, we're taking proper precautions, and we have these regulations in place to ensure that they can come into the country safely. And people are like, well, why does this only apply then to foreign athletes? Why not students, employees, significant others?
If there's a safe way of doing it, then that should be applicable to everyone. Or if there isn't a safe way of doing it, then it should stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also just saw that, didn't the Ugandan team, as they came into the country, within the first day of being in the country, tested positive for COVID?
One of the team members, yeah.
The idea that the idea that it's more safe. I mean, I think, especially with vaccination. I mean, vaccination in the United States, where I am of all places, I mean, it is very high. It's an issue, and I wish we could deal with it.
So they keep pushing forward with the Olympics because people claim that it will have a positive economic benefit for the country. But I think we don't believe that. And I think, honestly, if you were to look at it at a different level, you'd have a better economic benefit by letting in students, letting in new foreign employees. Do you think that there's a way that this could actually do long-term economic harm to Japan in the long run by making it so clear where their priorities are?
It seems to me, of course, from our perspective, it seems to be a damaging of the brand of Japan. And yet my assumption is that the pain that so many people are feeling right now, not being able to enter the country, that this unfair quality to this entire thing is unfortunately something that I think very few people in Japan are aware of at all, and very few people outside of those who are honestly trying to get into the country are aware of either outside of Japan. I wonder if it will really have that big of an effect. However, you're completely right in that Obviously, the things that seem to be more important for the economy in the long term are these non-flashy things about business happening in the country, about people making the country their home, about people having, coming to Japan to live and having children in the country. These things matter to Japan, but they're not flashy, and they're not something that previously it would have been Abe, and now it's Suga, for however long he lasts, can really, frame on the mantelpiece, right? So we'll see what happens, but I mean, it doesn't feel positive to me, even though I will say that in the Summer Sonic press release, they very specifically say the future success of the Olympics. They hinge everything about their announcement on the idea that it's a foregone conclusion. The Summer Olympics are going to be great, and they're going to open up the door for all this stuff to happen. So if Summer Sonic thinks it's going to happen, I have to agree.
So if Summer Sonic happening hinges on the Olympics not going horribly wrong, then I guess I am rooting for Uganda.
Hey, thanks very much for listening to this, episode 89 of Japan by River Cruise. If you enjoyed it, don't forget we have a new show every Friday.
Noah, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Unseen Japan, we have some really fantastic new articles coming out soon by some new guest writers as well as new staff writers. And we also have a video dropping tomorrow about the Japanese Red Army on our YouTube channel, so check it out.
Thank you, and we will see you next week.